So I want to begin by saying the inspiration for this talk was a thought that I had fairly recently about a relative, an older relative of mine. She was an aunt, and she died when I was in my early 20s. She and I were never really close, but I thought about something that she said. It was toward the end of her life. Actually, it was, I have to say, it was about the only thing that she said that I truly remember, but I remembered it over the years. It stayed with me. And what she said, and she was commenting about herself, and she said, "I'm nobody special." And I got to tell you, when I was in my early 20s, I was really judgmental. And when she said that, I didn't say anything, but I thought, "You're right." You're not anybody special. And I remember what had occurred to me afterwards. I was kind of jostled even at the time, and I thought, you know, it sounded like she wanted to be somebody special and that she was disappointed in it. That prompted her to say that she wasn't. Her comment bothered me, and my judgmentalism bothered me afterwards. And I remembered it, as I said, over the years. The question came up for me, well, really, what does it mean to be somebody special? And what does it mean to be nobody special? And what I'm going to be talking about tonight is really what I learned about that over the years, because it was very surprising where that inquiry took me. I had no idea in my early 20s where it might take me. So I will start with a story. And this is a story that comes from the Sufi tradition. And it is a story about a rabbi, medieval Europe somewhere, I guess. He was very well known, and he had lots of students, young men who were in training to become rabbis. His star student was a young man named Joseph. And Joseph was learned in everything you should be learned in, the Bible, the Talmud, and all these things. He was well respected, in fact, beloved by the others. And he was just the star student. He seemed to excel in all of it. Well, the time came when the rabbi was very old, and he was dying. And all of his students gathered around him for his last words. What would he say to them? What guidance? And he came around, talked to them, and told them where they should study and what they needed to focus on and what they should be doing. And then he got to Joseph, and he said, "Joseph, my son, go out and travel and tell teaching stories." Joseph was crushed. That's it? That's all? Everybody else was going to be going somewhere and learning and studying to become a rabbi, which is what he wanted to be. And his master just tells him, "Go tell teaching stories?" He thought, wow, I must be a failure. But these were his master's last words. So in fact, that's just what he did. He went and he traveled. Without any plan or agenda, he just traveled, and he told teaching stories to anybody who would listen, and people would give him lodging and food. And this went on for years and years. And then over the years, quite naturally, his stories became clearer and simpler. And Joseph himself became clearer and simpler. And then as time went on, people began to flock to him. And indeed, he became the rabbi that he had always wanted to be. But there was a difference. And the difference was that when he was young, he was driven by ego. He wanted to be the best, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? He really wanted to be absolutely the best rabbi, the most learned, the wisest, counsel most people. And toward the end, that dropped away the ego sense simply dropped away. Instead of achieving something, he began to embody it. He was it. And in this way, he learned his master's highest teaching. You see, this is actually something that his master couldn't teach him. It's something that he had to live into himself. And he did. He lived into it himself. Nobody special. This is what he became. And in becoming nobody special, he became something precious, something unique. He became what he always wanted to become, but didn't understand what he really wanted to become. I think that, I would say that all of us are caught, I'd say caught, in this kind of, we can call it whatever we want, dilemma, this dilemma of specialness. We're caught in it, I can say that for sure, because first of all, we see ourselves as an I, as a human being, as a me, I'm me. And of course, as soon as I see a me, then I see a you. And I see kind of gradations and betternesses and less betternesses. By that very fact, there's a specialness or a separateness. We set ourselves apart by seeing ourselves as a me. You know, even if you see yourself at the very bottom of the specialness barrel, you know, like just not competent enough or not, whatever you value, you're not enough of. I mean, don't we all know that one sometime or another? It's just not good enough in whatever areas we really value. That's seeing ourselves as someone special, even if it's the lowest of the low, right? But I think we add a further measure, we as human beings, to specialness. And that further measure, I think, is achievement. You see, the first one is so close, we hardly even notice it. We suffer with it all the time, but we don't notice it as being special. The second one, the achievement, that's what we really notice. Those people who achieve, they're really special. I mean, I think that's generally the way our society, and maybe you too, kind of think, those who achieve more, who have a bigger resume or greater achievements are more special than others. So I think there are kind of two ways in which we look at specialness. Which brings me to my story. I'll tell you a story about myself and specialness, and it goes back to third grade. And when I was in third grade, there was a list on the wall. Teacher put up a list on the walls, all the students' names. And we were to fill in with the stars. She gave us little gold stars for every book we read and book report that we filled out. And we had a little 3x5 cards. These were not extensive, little 3x5 card with the book reports. And I will tell you, I led the class. I had most stars, most gold stars. I loved looking at that list. It was really a pleasure. And then one horrible day, Leonard came to class, who was one of the students, and he had no stars after his name. That was okay by me, no stars. And then all of a sudden he came to class and he started pasting up star after star after star. He had held all his book reports until one onslaught, that is how I felt it, one time. And by the end, by the time he finished pasting up stars, he was way ahead of me. And the truth was, I never caught up by the end of the semester. So I no longer liked looking at that list because, you see, it wasn't good enough to be second. I wanted to be first. So the list became like a personal reproach to me. I was no longer special enough. No longer special enough. So the Buddha really understood what being nobody special means. He understood it profoundly. And I would like to suggest, I think he talked about it in two different ways. First, he warned. He warned against trying to achieve fame or gain. He said, don't do it. It brings only suffering. I could attest to that, although I didn't know anything about it in third grade. You know, I was suffering mightily with these book reports and the stars. It's going to bring only suffering. And that was my third grade version of fame, of course. No fame. Don't run after it. No gain. Simply being nobody special. More fundamentally, the Buddha talked about being nobody special in another way. And he says, we're nobody, period. Not only nobody special, we're nobody. One of the Buddha's core teachings is the teaching of no self, or anatta is the ancient Pali word. Now, this is one of the from most people, the most perplexing teaching. It's very hard to grasp. Why? Well, because it's not, the mind can't grasp it, that's why, basically. It has to be experienced what that means. But he did say it's one of the characteristics of existence. There is no self. We tend to think of ourselves as selves. Wrong, it's illusion, it's no self. So in this way too, he was talking about nobody special. It's an illusion to think you are. In fact, it's an illusion to think that you are anybody anyway, to begin with. So, it occurs to me that in a way this is kind of confusing. The Buddha spent a great part of his teaching is devoted to instructing us as somebodies of how to live wisely, how to live ethically, how to live with kindness. And so a question could arise to our logical mind, well, if he spent all that time, and he did, you have to just pick up the suttas and you'll see all the time he spent talking about how to live in this daily world as somebodies. And so why would he even bother to do that if we're not anybody anyway? And I'll say, because of compassion. Because he knew that most of us live on the level of somebodies. Even those of us who may truly know that there's nobody there, we have to live on the level of being somebody's. And this, he says, is the way to live, with kindness, with clarity and mindfulness, and ethically. So basically what the Buddha was saying is that ultimately, on the ultimate level, we're nobody, much less nobody special. But on the everyday level, he said, don't compound the illusion that you're somebody with the illusion that fame and gain and chasing after being special is going to bring you happiness. It won't. It'll only bring you suffering. So this is how the Buddha taught. Do you see? Two levels. And it's a little confusing until you really see why he did it. Two levels. Everyday level and this level of not being anybody. So I thought maybe I'd just spend a little time talking about a portrait. What's the portrait of nobody special? From the Buddhist point of view, it's someone who is not caught up in greed, hatred, or aversion. Most of us think when we hear the word hatred, it's just too much. We think, well, I don't really hate, but we sure have a lot of aversiveness. We don't like this, and we don't quite like that. So when he said hatred, or when it was translated as hatred, he really meant all forms of aversiveness, like kind of back away from that. Greed, hatred, and delusion, or confusion. That is what marks someone who thinks they're special, and someone who knows that nobody's special isn't governed by greed, hate, or delusion. Someone who is nobody's special has no suffering. Somebody who's nobody's special is peace, has peace. So I'm going to quote to you a comment that the Buddha made, and it's his scripture. It's from the Middle-Length Discourses. It's the scripture on the true man. It's 113 in the Middle-Length Discourse, if anybody is interested. He said, and when he talks about a true man, of course, we recognize that those times were very patriarchal. We will include a woman as well, right? True man or a true woman, a true being, a true being. He said, a true man considers thus: it is not because of one's renown that states of greed, hatred, and delusion are destroyed. Even though someone may not be well known and famous, yet if he has entered upon the way that accords with the Dhamma is the word for Dharma, or teaching. If he has entered in the way that accords with the Dhamma and conducts himself according to the Dhamma, he should be praised for that. So putting the practice first, he neither lauds himself nor disparages others because of his own renown. This is the character of a true man. So a true man, neither praising himself and not seeking after fame and gain, nor disparaging others. I really like the Taoist description. Maybe some of you have read some of that. They talk all the time of a man, and we'll say, or of a woman, of endless ease. Isn't that a beautiful description? Someone of nobody special. It's a person, a man or a woman of endless ease. Also described as the sane man, S-A-N-E, which of course makes you wonder, what about everybody else? What's the implication? From the point of view of most people, this sane man is seen as a fool or a simpleton. That's how they talk about it. They will describe someone who is sane, someone who is nobody special, is a fool or a simpleton. He is or she is living according to a different standard which isn't understood, is what the Taoists are saying. So here's a quote from the Tao Te Ching, which is the core Taoist text, and I'm quoting here from a translation by Witterbiner, who is a poet in his own right. I like his translation. He said, and this is by Lao Tzu, and of course Lao Tzu is a legendary figure. Literally, Lao Tzu means old man. We don't even know if he existed, but okay. Keep stretching a bow, and you repent the pull. A whetted saw goes thin and dull. Surrounded with treasure, you lie ill at ease. Proud beyond measure, you come to your knees. Do enough without vying, be living, not dying. Do enough without vying, be living, not dying. Not striving after specialness, gold stars or whatever your version of it, specialness might be. Now, how specialness? How does one become somebody, nobody special? And I think that the process, we can call it, and many people have, although in a different context, cooking. We cook. That's what we're doing as we practice. We are cooking in our practice, or more specifically, we are being cooked. You know, I have to say, first of all, I recognize for some of us, especially if you're hearing this for the first time or thereabouts, the idea of being nobody special may not even be appealing. Maybe you're not even sure that you want to be nobody special. But the bottom line, the news is, if you are practicing, it's too bad. You're being cooked. Beyond, you can't even help it. You're going in that direction without even maybe being aware of it. So, that's the bottom line. But I call it cooking, or not only me, others, I didn't make this up. It's the nature of the practice is onward leading. I love the term, to be onward leading. It leads into what we know not what, but we can trust it as we continue with the practice and go deeper into it and experience, oh yes, this is right, whatever it may be, wherever it's going. We know without question, this is sound. This I can trust. the onward leading. Now, the issue about being cooked is that you can't cook yourself. You are, as I said, you are being cooked. It's the process. I think when we first start practicing, when we first come to spiritual inquiry, we can kind of think of it as personal housekeeping. The Buddha spoke a lot about our hindrances and ways in which we can free ourselves from those burdens, those hang-ups. He didn't call them hang-ups, but those ways in which we are stuck. And when we first come to teaching, many of us are really drawn by that. In fact, I often say, I think that we are either pushed or pulled into practice. We can be pushed, and this is the personal housekeeping part of it, because we are suffering so much. We are so aware that life is unsatisfactory, that we are just desperate to find something, and this offers it. That's being the pushed. The being pulled is, I think, the heart yearns. The heart yearns for something. Call it whatever you want to call it, the sacred or whatever it is, something we can't put into words. I think we all have a combination of both, pushed and pulled. But when we are cooking, often we're really focusing, at least at the beginning, on our personal housekeeping, cleaning up our act. I remember you mentioned, Whitney, that I lived in a Zen monastery for a while. As a layperson, I hadn't ordained. And I was asked fairly close at the beginning, was there anything that I felt, what did I feel needed cleaning up? What was it that I regretted in my life that I could clean up? And that's what many of us come into practice, not only stuff that we've done, but we go deeper. We begin to recognize internally the things that keep us stuck in unwholesome circumstances, and more profoundly, in unwholesome, habitual, reactive patterns. That's what we want to clean up. And this is important, and the Buddha focused on that. The Buddha focused a lot on that. We want to clean up or declutter ourselves. However, as we continue practicing, we begin to glimpse something that's deeper. We begin to see beyond the personal housekeeping that we are doing, this cleaning up, which is so important. It's fundamental, it's got to be done. But we begin to experience something deeper and beyond that. We begin to experience something, we can call it, it's boundless. That isn't about me at all. It's not about me at all. But I want to go back before I talk too much about that right now. You know what? We can cook for decades. We do cook for decades. We never know who's done. I don't know. I know I'm not done. And I don't know. We know the Buddha was done. I'm sure there were other people and other great leaders, spiritual beings who were done. But the rest of us are still cooking in various stages of doneness or undoneness. We're not absolutely raw anymore, that's for sure. But we're not done either. So in the story that I told you at the beginning, like Joseph, it took him a long time before he began to embody that which he was really seeking. And for all of us too. Is that a problem? No, it's not a problem. When we begin, we are so impatient. We want it now. I know what that is. You really want it now. And as you go on, you begin to realize it doesn't matter. All that matters is that you trust what's going on. You know you're cooking. And where you are, you are. That's fine. All is well. All is well. So I think the catalyst, or that which makes us cook, the heat, is the pressure of daily life, where we begin to run up against edges and we see, look, that's the suffering. Not good enough. Something needs to change there. Something needs to change there. When we feel that heat of daily life, that's when we cook. And we talk about that. All of you, I am sure, have attended many talks. And we've talked many times about being mindful of the places in which we are stuck and our patterns, our habitual patterns. So I'm not going to talk about that a lot right now. But we know that we have to come back with mindfulness a million times. A million times. There's no end to the number of times we come back and notice the times we are stuck. Oh, need to change. We do it mindfully. And what is it that we do when we realize we're stuck? The teaching is, let go. I'm sure you've all heard that saying by Thich Nhat Hanh, if you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. And I don't have it exactly, but if you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you'll have complete peace and freedom. So we're all letting go. We're all letting go. Or, as we often say, we are leaning into. Leaning into. And what do we lean into? We lean into the unknown. We lean into the unknown. It can be very, very scary. In other words, we're pulling out of a known unwholesome pattern of behavior or possibly circumstance. Maybe a very unsatisfactory circumstance or behavior, but at least it's known. When you know something, it's more comfortable than facing what you don't know, right? Always. I was just telling, I think it was Mike, about driving. I mean, this is a silly example, but I find driving at night on urban streets that I don't know scary. That could be actually dangerous too. But anyway, this on all levels of our lives, leaning into the unknown, and it's very, very frightening. And I think all of you know or have heard how the brain is wired, the negativity bias of the brain. That's how we have survived as a species, because we see threat. What's threat? Well, it's not only something, it's looking at the unknown and say, what do I do now? So the scariness of it all. So we lean into the unknown. That's what our practice is telling us to do. I saw an image recently. It was a postcard. And it was a postcard, and it looked like it was shot in probably the 1960s, and it was a photo of a woman. It was clearly at some kind of exhibition, like a horse show or a rodeo. And she was astride two horses, quite literally astride. She was standing on the backs of two horses. They had saddles on. I guess her feet were strapped into some kind of holder there. And they were in the midst, and it caught them, in the midst of jumping over a car. It was a convertible that was turned sideways. Can you imagine that? It was turned sideways, and they were jumping over it. Then you look more carefully at the photo, and you see that one horse is a stride ahead of the second horse. They weren't quite in sync. And then you take a look at her face, a big grimace on her face. They're in midair, and she knows they're not going to land simultaneously. Like, what happened 1 second after that photo was taken, right? I think this is what life can feel like. We are leaping into the unknown, and possibly it's a disaster in front of us. Possibly a disaster in front of us. So, our teaching says, lean into what's not known. But not in a daredevil way, like this woman. It was a pretty stupid thing to do, isn't it? It's really stupid. Okay, don't be stupid, but lean into what isn't known. Take the leap. Do it. I think that there are like as I thought about it, I came up with 4 different factors or prerequisites before we take that leap. 4 things that we have to need to happen. And I think number 1, you have to be mindful. You have to figure out what needs letting go of to begin with. Now, that might sound so obvious, but you know what? To a lot of people, it's not obvious. They don't even recognize it. How many people do we know, including ourselves at times, who simply go around and spin in a circle about how horrible something is, and it may really be horrible, but we just continue to go around and around very unprofitably. It makes no sense. We're just digging ourselves into a deeper hole. We need to be mindful, oh, this isn't satisfactory. This needs to be let go of. So that's number one. And I think that the second factor that we need to take in mind is timing. When is it the right time, the right place to let go? The Buddha called this clear comprehension. How to act. When's the right time? When's the right place? When's the right way? How do we act with kindness? And clarity. That's what he was saying. Clear comprehension. You don't just barge into things and do it. Be clear about it. It takes a lot of training to be clear. A third factor, I think, is courage. One of the 7 factors of enlightenment that the Buddha spoke about is courageous energy. Courageous energy. We need to have the courage. We may see, okay, yeah, mindfulness. Yes, this needs to be let go of. This is unwholesome, and continuing it is just making me miserable. And others too, very possibly. And the second factor about right timing, and this is the right time to do it. And so we have calls for courage to go ahead and do it. It's kind of like what I always think of as a high diving board issue. Anybody ever been on a high diving board? And you stand and you look down at that water that seems so far down below. And I don't know about you, but usually there's a bunch of kids coming up behind you, and you don't have a whole lot of choice. You can't really back up and go the other way. But sometimes when we don't have a bunch of kids coming behind us, and we're standing there and looking, and we know it's the right time, and mindfully says we need to do it, but in fact, we just can't do it. We don't have the courage sometimes. And I think all of us have felt that. And sometimes that brings us to the fourth factor. And the fourth factor, I think, is a willingness to try again. You don't do it. You fail. You don't do it, and then, okay, I messed up that time. I didn't do it. No, I should have. I'll try again. A factor to which we need to bring a lot of kindness, gentleness toward ourselves. Not to beat ourselves up because we failed, but to realize, okay, yeah, so I will try again. And I'll say that, our lives give us endless opportunity to do that, right? No lack of opportunity to find places that need letting go of and the time to do it. And then we can go and we try again and again. Our practice doesn't let us forget. It's a beautiful saying by a Tibetan Rinpoche, Khenpo Tsongtrem Gyatso Rinpoche. And he says, erring and erring, we follow the unerring path. Mm-hmm. Isn't that beautiful? Erring and erring, we follow the unerring path. We're going to make mistakes, a lot of them. We're going to see it's time to jump off the diving board, and we don't do it. No problem. We're following the unerring path. Whatever messy way, whatever our own messiness is, yeah, we're going to be going there. So, it seems to me that as we practice with bearing nobody's being, nobody special, we practice that. An important feature to bear in mind is that your life is the only standard that matters. I'm not saying be selfish, and I'm not saying only you matter. It's not about that. But our tendency is so much to compare. Again, it's about the gold stars, right? No, I only have the second most gold stars. That's not good enough. We always do that, and it may not be gold stars. It may be our own personal difficulties, the disadvantages in our life, the mistakes we've made in our life. We need to realize and come home to who you are. And that is, your life is the standard here. quote by a Zen teacher, Jack Haubner. So it was in an article in Tricycle recently. And he said he was very sick. He was in the hospital and he thought he was dying. And he said, at that moment, he was in the hospital bed, and he said, I realized then that my life was the only standard by which my life could be judged. And therefore it had been, in its own way, perfect. He's saying, without concluding all of the mistakes and the setbacks and the inadequacies, because it's not to be judged by any other criteria except what it has been. It brings each of us to where we are now. And it is perfect in its own way. Now maybe you resist that. I for a long time did. Somebody said, oh, everything is perfect. I said, oh, come on, perfect. This is not exactly how I would describe it. But if we can step back and really see what he's talking about, it's your life. There's no other measure. And instead of going out there and against all these standards that are everywhere, valuing your own life for what it is, says it's perfect. And that's what I think that we learn. I think that's what we need to learn on this path as we train, as we practice. I think that's what this young man Joseph, when he was no longer a young man, eventually learned. This just traveling around and teaching stories, not being well known, none of that stuff that he had yearned for. It was perfect just as it was. And maybe many of you have had that glimpse at times, just right now. Not only that the moment is perfect, but all is well. All is well. Does that maybe resonate? Maybe resonate. So I think that the gateway for every one of us is ourself, no matter where we are in it. And again, please understand, it's not about being selfish or self-centered. It's about valuing the preciousness of your own life. It's about making our own life a work of art, recognizing and affirming, honoring the beauty of your own life. So, being aware when we tend to belittle and reduce yourself, not good enough, or stack yourself up against others. And again, it's not about, it's also subtle, and I think you recognize that. It's not about saying that no other standard is important. Of course we need to bear these things in mind, but as we practice, we need at the heart to recognize it's your life, this is your life, and that is what you need to honor. So, going back to my aunt, all those years ago, and being bothered by her comment about being nobody special. I had no idea that it would lead into the kinds of things that I'm talking about tonight. It's been quite a journey, and a long journey, and I think we each have a long journey. It is a journey that we don't know, a journey without end until, in fact, it does end. But it's ongoing. It's ongoing. And I certainly, as I've said, don't claim I'm there yet, whatever there is. Being nobody special. So thank you for listening. So I'd like to, first of all, say, are there any questions or comments about any of this? Nobody special. Yes, sir.
Susan, thank you, first of all, very much. I found that really helpful for myself. Your concept of decluttering, which happens in the process of mindfulness meditation. Yeah. Are we always aware of what needs to be decluttered? I'm thinking of experiences in my life at times when I wasn't aware of of issues that I was dealing with until I ran into a situation later on weeks or months, and I handled it differently. And it wasn't until then that I thought, well, maybe this is a result of what I'm cooking or something, frying or something. But I wasn't aware of that about me at the time.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. This practice surprises us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then we're in a situation, and all of a sudden we do something that we might not even known that we would do, or we say, and it's just right.
And it feels much
Because
better.
you have been training the heart and mind in a way that you're able to react spontaneously in a moment, in ways that are just right.
And without even kind of being aware.
Yeah. Now, I think as we train, we become more mindful of our hang-ups, but they're always a surprise. And their hang-ups, they'll come back. After we thought, boy, I got that one ace, I got it, dealt with. We realize, no, we haven't. But yes, there's always those. And isn't that a wonderful surprise?
Yeah. So the process does make us more aware of those hang-ups, or that's kind of the way it goes.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. But not to think, oh, you were remiss because you weren't aware in that particular situation that it even needed.
Yeah.
I think we need to take with such gratitude and wonder when things like that happen. And it's an affirmation of what this training does, what it is about. That's why we can trust this training. We can trust it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, you have a question.
No. In your opinion, do you think the Buddha would have considered himself done to cooking? Because I find that could possibly be the ultimate gold star.
The ultimate gold star.
We now think that
Yeah.
he has finished. And
Yeah,
somebody
first of all, I
was
think that he
finished.
did, he, by his own admission, this is a great story. And I'm not gonna be able to quote it exactly, but after he first had his supreme enlightenment, and he was, decided that he would teach, and he was walking to find his 5, I guess you say colleagues, the other sannyasis that he had been training with, and he met on the path an Ajivika. The Jivakas were a member of another sect. They were a naked group, and this Ajivika stopped him. He saw that the Buddha was really very unusual, and he asked him, "Sir, who are you?" And then he went through, "Are you a king or a prince? No. And are you, and maybe you've heard this, are you something else? I don't remember what it was, but it was no. Are you a god? No." And then he said, "Well, what are you?" And he said, "I am awake." Now that's the way we tell the story usually, but in fact he said an awful lot of other things as well, the Buddha. And he said, and I can't quote it, but he said, "I am the only one who has been self-realized and have no master," and I mean, he really filled it out. And this other guy looked at him and he said, "Well, good for you, sir." And then he walked off the other direction. It's less inspiring than the first part when we come up with "I am awake," and we say, "Wow." But he did say that he was ultimately enlightened. However, the amazing part of that is it absolutely is without ego. There's no gold star. It is gold starless. Gold stars don't even figure in. Good question. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Dr. Zimmerman, thank you for coming tonight. Do you have suggestions for identifying the things that we're stuck on?
Yes. Be mindful. Yeah, you'll feel it. The more you are really honest and mindful with yourself, you listen, what feels staticky? It's not just that you're not getting the results you want, but what inside of you just doesn't feel clear, doesn't feel light. What feels like burdensome or heavy? That's the pointer, right there. I'm stuck. And then you can watch on other levels. What are repetitive behaviors that just, again, feel heavy? Unwholesome. What's not wholesome? Because in your behaviors and are there habitual patterns that aren't wholesome? Does that make sense? Say more if it doesn't. Maybe I'm responding too abstractly.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That helps. I mean, just the areas you feel uncomfortable with.
Yes,
But you have to, I guess, listen.
absolutely. That's what mindfulness is. It's listening without judgment. Not like saying, "Oh, this is horrible." Oh, you inquire with interest. Oh, look at that. That's coming up again. And I do that. I tend to do that. Now, we all find places in ourselves as we practice mindfulness that we can't stand. These things that we don't like about ourselves. That's okay, because we're human beings. We know it and we see it. So we just keep listening and we recognize what we're not comfortable with. It doesn't feel clear. It feels heavy. Those are some of the physical sensations that can be experienced. Or intellectually, you can just notice, wow, I'm doing this again and again and again, and it's not wholesome.
So to follow up then, how do we distinguish those from the areas that we just aren't good at? I mean, there's some things that maybe we're uncomfortable with that we just plain have to accept. It's just who we are. Maybe
Good.
energy level or...
Absolutely. That's a wonderful question. We hope to have the clarity that recognize, what? Where each of us are different. Remember, we just said that each of our lives is the only standard against which we can judge. And that means nobody's perfect. And we're not going to be good and cannot be good at everything. And, I don't know about you, but I think when we're young, we have certain expectations about what we are or should be and all of that. And then by golly, it turns out you actually aren't. And we need to just accept. And it's okay. That's the point of being able to accept just what you said. Okay, I can accept it. My life doesn't have to be like that. I'd like it to be good at whatever, an analysis or math or at interactions with people or whatever it is. It just isn't in the cards. You try. You leaned into it maybe and tried it and it just keeps not working. Eventually accepting. So the Buddha had a term, wise discernment. Being able to discern when it is something you just are not good at. You're just never going to be a mathematician, no matter how hard you try. It's not going to happen. As opposed to being always going after it. I've got to try harder. The wise discernment means being mindful, bringing mindfulness wisely to what's going on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I was wondering if that ties in or maybe not.
And can you speak up, please?
I was wondering if that would tie in or maybe not when I question when between courage and stupidity, your example was very clear, the lady on the horses that's very stupid, and then you have being courageous. But sometimes in my mind, that courage is lacking because I think that's stupid.
Now, okay, so you think what, a particular action is stupid?
Yeah, so to make that leap, that is stupid. That's how to discern whether it's truly stupid or when it's courageous.
Yeah, and you know what? There's going to, first of all, be no real hard and fast rule because it's
Right.
situation by situation, so I can only respond on them generally and say, first of all, our mindfulness, bringing mindfulness to it without judgment, just seeing it. And mindfulness can have a component in the body where you can have that feeling, that needs doing. Is it appropriate for my life? It is not right versus wrong, but is this the appropriate thing? And you know what? You'll make mistakes. And one example that I give sometimes, because I experienced it, it was when my mother was dying. Actually, I write about it in that book. And it was at the beginning, she had cancer, she was in the hospital, and she was diagnosed, it was a terminal diagnosis. And so I came to live with her and was her primary caregiver. And the question was, when she came back from the hospital, should I get a hospital bed for her to come back home to, because I knew that was probably what she needed, or should I leave the bed that she and my dad had slept in for decades? And I made the decision to leave that bed because she was coming home with her whole life premise, her whole life changed. And when she came back home within 2 days, she decided that she needed a hospital bed. But, so first of all, I never thought about it being a stupid thing, but it was a dilemma. And you could say, or I realized I could have said that I made the wrong choice. But I didn't for a moment feel bad about it. I knew that I had decided on what I felt was the most appropriate and important criteria I could. Turned out it wasn't quite right, or maybe she was greatly, heartened and supported by coming home to the bed that she knew. But we changed it within 2 days. But do you see, when you really ask, I use the word appropriate, and I think there are others. We use that word technically, usually in our language, in a very superficial way, kind of. But I'm using it in a deep way. And when you make a decision, is this the appropriate thing under these conditions right now? That changes it. It takes a lot of the thought out of it. You feel into it. And if it's a yes, go for it. And it may turn out to be wrong. There's not, in my experience, it's not a problem if it turns out that it's been wrong, because you've trusted. You've trusted the deepest thing that you know. And that's all we can finally go on, is that trust. Not a big decision tree, not a lot of cogitation. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's the best I can.
So would it also be like, is this the most wholesome action I can do? So you leave that?
Yes, but wholesome really understood in a deep way, because, maybe it involves you need to say some very sharp words to someone. And you can say, well, is that wholesome? I think your mindfulness needs to tell you what's the right, appropriate action here. Yeah. And yeah. Yes, Philip.
This is the first time that I've had the opportunity to listen to you, and it's been very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very intrigued by your metaphor of cooking. I was talking with somebody yesterday who's relatively new to practice, and this is a rather accomplished person in her late 30s. And so at that stage of life, if we accomplish some things, we have a sense
Special.
that if we work hard, we do the right things, we keep trying harder, we put more effort in, we will get results, because that's been our experience. And so it's very hard to understand that this experience of practice is more like the cooking, in which the conditions are set, and then you allow. I mean, you put a turkey in the oven, and you do X number of things so that it cooks properly. But the turkey is not busy doing anything to make the cooking happen.
Right.
And our willingness to let go of the doing things to make it happen is such a challenge, because it's so much at variance with that daily ego self, and it's so much at variance with our experience.
Yeah.
So I just think it's a great reference, and I loved that you used the word done, which is how we describe the turkey. When I complete a task, I'm finished with it. I'm not done with it. When the turkey's cooked, it's not finished. It's done.
Yeah. Yes, truly, truly. And I have to say, the cooking is not I didn't come up with that. I didn't originate it. Yes. And maybe this woman that you're speaking about at some point will realize that her approach of accomplishing and really trying harder has certain important benefits on her everyday level, but it's not going to bring her peace.
Well, this is a lesson I'm still learning every day.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And this is part of our cooking for each one of us, yeah. And she's cooking. And hopefully if she stays in this practice with guidance, as you're giving her, she'll begin to realize there's also, not instead of, but also there's something else that needs to be learned. And with time, hopefully, she will. Yeah, thank you. Wes?
Yeah, Susan, I have a thought about your comment about that practice sometimes goes in unexpected directions, and it sort of ties into what Phil was talking about as well. I'm in business, and I have sort of prided myself in my life in being decisive in various areas, you know, and making decisions and living with the consequences, whatever those might be. And recently, I've had a situation where I had to make a very important decision for myself personally, and really didn't have a decision. I wasn't able to make a decision. I mean, it was, and what I eventually learned about that was that there are times when living with uncertainty is the decision, and so that wasn't what I expected. I wasn't expecting, you know, to have to live with uncertainty in this situation, but that's what emerged, and it felt uncomfortable, but it felt right, like that was, you know, but that was unexpected. It wasn't certainly not what I.
Are you saying the making of recognizing that you weren't yet in a position, or you weren't in a position to make the decision?
Right.
Yes. How beautiful. Yeah, and so you lived, or maybe still are, with the uncertainty of it all. You know, there's an observation that our degree of spiritual maturity is measured by our ability to live with uncertainty. Yeah.
And not only to live with it, but to be able to express your uncertainty because there are other people involved in the situation, and be able to say, I just don't know. I don't know.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Does anybody else, a comment or a question? Yes.
I have one.
Whitney.
I want to take it, maybe this is somewhat related to Wes and Philip's question, but in thinking about your story about yourself in the 3rd grade and your fame and your gain and then your loss and your perceived disrepute, and that the suffering for you came in as it often does for us with the loss and the disrepute. But I've been noticing in myself lately that even having something that would be considered in the world to be some sort of fame or some sort of gain can be fraught with suffering. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the relationship to those quote-unquote positive windfalls,
right.
And how that could be equally difficult.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what the Buddha was talking about. That fame and gain, he called it the 8 worldly dharmas, and fame and gain were only 2 of them, and there are others as well, disrepute, just others that can only bring suffering. It will, now first of all, I think that we need to, because we are householders, and we need to be able to live in this life. We have to have goals, we have to have agendas, we have to do things. And we certainly hope that they're going to produce some positive results. But we know, and that's the complexity of it all. So 2 levels that we need to live. And one is the everyday practical level of doing what we need to do, and the other is the recognition it's never going to bring. And that's what that's the Buddha's teaching. Fame and gain are never going to bring the happiness. So yes, what we perceive as success, no, it's not going to be it's not the ultimate happiness. Does that,
Yeah, I think the difficulty for me, and you're touching on it, is in pursuing those things as a householder, a lay person, or a person of the world, you know, I have to pursue certain things for myself and my family, and it's how to pursue them without getting caught in,
right.
you know, without getting identified with them.
Oh, what a wonderful question. That's the big question. You know, we always We always ask ourselves, and I say on a simple level, as we continue with practice and in a Sangha. And I'll touch more on it tomorrow. Eventually something else begins to happen, and when we begin to touch into, to really experience let's call it the ultimate state, and I won't even go into that, but then our relationship to our life begins to switch, to shift. And so that there is a knowledge, a profound knowledge that exists, that we see all of that in a different perspective. And I hope tomorrow that I'll say more and maybe fill some of that out, but I think you already got it. Yeah.
I wish.
Yeah, well, yeah, we understand it intellectually.
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand
Yes.
it here, right.
Yeah, but yes, it is the challenge that we all face, and that's what the cooking part of it is.